The SG Child Show is back for its 13th season. Join Sarah Bradford and the SG Child Show team as they explore the world of autism and share stories of hope and inspiration. This season, we're excited to bring you more autism summits featuring experts and advocates from around the world. Go to sgchilds.org.
In the heart of the city, she's shining bright. Oh yeah, stories of love and courage all throughout the night.
Hi, and thanks for joining the SJ Child Show. I'm really excited today to get into this conversation with John. Is it just pronounced Fela?
Actually, Fela.
Fella, okay.
Yeah, but I think
Is
that's it.
what heritage is that from?
Believe it or not, it's actually Polish.
Okay.
Both my mom and dad were both Polish on either side, and I know that most people thought that it might have been shortened from something at some point, but we've actually, we were able to kind of trace the lineage a little bit, and there are other folks actually with the exact same name too. So go figure. I will say though, and this is also just something that I normally say for the end, but since you brought up the last name, much of my content for anybody who looks me up is actually going to be under a different last name, which is Fela Geller. And the reason for that is because that was actually my married name in my previous marriage. So I've since been divorced and remarried. But my ex-wife at the time and we took our two last names, put them together, had it legally changed. So I used to be Fela Geller, but now I'm going back to just Fela, dropping that. It hasn't all gone through the courts and everything yet. And a lot of my old content is still under the previous name. So I tell people you can find me either one way or another. You'll see my stuff.
Right.
So that's not confusing. So
I love it. I love it. Well, I was really happy to go from my maiden name to my married name because my maiden name is Gulliher. And it was just really tricky for people. So Bradford, and then Childs is just my author name, S.J. Childs. It was a play on words for the child genre because I was writing children's books. So yeah, kind of fun.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get into why you're here today. Share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and then we'll get into this conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I like to jokingly refer to myself as the Swiss Army knife of disability advocacy or disability ministry. So I'm all special needs all the time. So first of all, I identify as a parent of disability. I have a 17-year-old son, Chris, who's autistic and nonverbal. He's currently living at a residential facility out in Wichita, Kansas. That's not a forever thing. That's just so he can basically finish high school and then he'll come home. But that's just where he's at now. And I will tell you that when I say all disability all the time, so that looks a variety of different ways. My day job is actually working for an organization called Joni and Friends, which is a global Christian disability ministry that supports people and families all over the world. We're in over 30 countries, but I work out of our Chicago area office, and we handle several states in the Midwest. And so we do a variety of outreach and things with families. My job actually specifically is to work with churches to train them on disability awareness, provide resources, training for staff, and just help people to, really support and serve the disability population in their congregation. But then outside of that, I'm an advocate in my own right, and that actually started for me several years ago, even before I was doing this job. But I kind of felt a couple things. One thing I felt was I realized as a parent, and also more specifically as a dad, that I was not resourced. I didn't, have a lot of support. There was just a lot missing in terms of answers to questions and things like that. So, in the way that most parents of disability go out looking for answers, I also felt the need to give back. And in that way, not only was I able to support and help and bless other people, but I was also able to help get resourced myself through those relationships and experiences. So I started out in small ways, like starting a support group for special needs dads in my community, which I still run to this day. But then getting involved with other national organizations and ministries that serve disability. So I've been a writer and a speaker for many organizations for several years and do a variety of presentations, podcasts, just like this, obviously. And then I'm involved with, support for parents and families. again, specifically for dads. I'm actually involved with a couple different organizations that support special needs dads, and that looks, a variety of different ways. But really, I just come back to that support piece, and I always like to see myself as someone who, if someone comes to me with a question or an issue, or whatever they want to talk about, I'm always willing to have that conversation. I may not have an answer for you, but I certainly can probably point you in the right direction. And I think that's what all of us as parents on this journey need to, just kind of keep us going and keep us going down the road.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? We sound like we're on very similar journeys, very similar. And I really just love all that you're doing. And I think when it comes, especially as a parent and as a self advocate, I got my own diagnosis 3 years ago and really helped me to perceive everything a little differently. And the support piece within our family was just like a celebration. It was beautiful. It was tangible. We could really kind of understand each other in a different way than ever before. But it really, as a parent, I understand where that passion comes from, that passion and that in seeking for resources, oftentimes we find that sounds like in your case as well, that we really have kind of some knowledge from our experiences that we can also share. And it's so important. And I think that, in this podcast, for example, we're 300 and something episodes into it now. And that is so much learning and so much teaching and so much sharing of just invaluable information that is just, helping people on so many different parts of their journey. We're all in a different part of our journey. And I think it's just wonderful what you're doing. And, it's great when I find the dad component. And I have some I'm sure that you probably already connected to them, dads that I'd love to connect you with that do great organizations and things like that. So tell us a little bit about where it, like that starting point for you, if you don't mind going back to that, and what that looked like, and how maybe you pivoted from an old life that you were in to what you were going to be doing.
Yeah, I love telling that story, and for me, it actually goes back about 15 years. So my son originally got his diagnosis when he was about 3, which is typical for these kinds of things. And I would tell you at that time, like most parents, I was lost, confused. We were trying to figure out exactly, to what degree this is, because, when your kids are young and you have a diagnosis, on the one hand, there's a lot of hope because you feel there's all this time in the world, and maybe he'll just grow out of it, or maybe something will just change, right? And of course, then when things don't start to change, then you have to kind of dig in a little more. But what I noticed, and again, this is very specific, I think, to my journey as a husband and as a father, was in our marriage and in our family, and I think this is a pretty typical dynamic as well for most. My son's mom, my ex-wife, was excellent with handling all of the nuts and bolts, all of the ins and outs, managing the doctors, the therapies, the insurance. And she was a very type A personality, and what was a teacher, so had a teacher brain. I'm actually a former teacher as well, so I can appreciate that. But she handled all that. And, her mom, my mother-in-law also was very involved and brought a lot to the table. And I had to kind of figure out, okay, so what do I do here? Because more often than not, with a lot of families, the dad, men are fixers, right? And so if we can't fix the issue, what am I going to do? Well, let me throw myself into my work. Let me throw myself into my career. Let me pay for all these things. I might not understand all of it. I might not be the one actually taking our kid to this or that, but I can write a check. Well, in my case, I couldn't do that either because I was not the breadwinner. My ex-wife always made more money than me. So if I couldn't write the check, and if I wasn't handling all of these things that she was, then what was my role? What was my purpose? What did I do? What did I contribute? And what unfortunately transpired, and we went through a season of life again, years ago, where all of a sudden things just stopped working, right? Our relationship, our marriage started to crumble a lot because, there was this, there's this guilt and shame that develops in terms of, who's doing more, or, I'm contributing more to this and you're not contributing enough. And really I was just on an island, and we didn't really have a lot of support. We were going through so much again in terms of finding the right school placement for him, figuring out the right insurance. I had a job loss, so that really contributed to things. And again, there was nowhere to pull from. There was no support. There was no structure. I tell a story in my presentations. I call it a tale of two parking lots, where I describe a scene where I was sitting in my car one day because the church we attended at the time, there was a men's group I used to go to. And I sat in my car, and this was during the summer of 2012, actually. I sat in the car. I called a couple of my oldest friends, trying to, see if they could support me somehow. They had no clue what to do for me because the experience was so foreign to them, even though they were both married, although they had no kids yet. And then I go into this men's group meeting, and even all of those men who were, minimum 20 years older than me, they still had nothing for me. And so I realized that very quickly I had no community. So what I did then was I did a couple of things, is that, I intentionally sought out community. I sought out community, in those places where it was easiest enough to plug in. And for us, really, that came down to moving to a new town, getting my son in a new school district, connecting with those parents and families, connecting, with folks in our community. And that's actually where my first dad's meetup group came out of, was just those guys in the community. And then, guys maybe that were maybe a town or two over, but then as our journey, progressed and developed, then it really became something where I saw what I didn't have when I struggled, and, going through a season of life where I literally almost lost my marriage. Now, I did wind up getting divorced, but at least at the time I didn't lose it. But having almost gone through that, not sure about what the future was going to hold, even to the point of being suicidal, which I'm also very transparent about as well. Going from that to really intentionally finding those resources, but then also trying to intentionally build them again with the support groups, with connecting with other organizations locally and around the country, and giving back in a variety of ways, but developing relationships then that not only supported me when I needed them to, but also then I could take those things and then share it with others. And so it created a really nice synergy in my life. And of course, what I didn't know was, even a few years after this, I would really wind up needing those resources as a, divorced dad and as a single father, at least for a short time. So that's where I really say that there isn't anyone that I wouldn't help, because I know what it is to be alone and have nothing. And that is no way to live. And especially when you are walking this path of disability, it is not the ideal or optimal way to be doing this. And you really need at least one relationship. That's the other thing I tell people. You might not have a whole community. You might not have a tribe. Start with one. Start with one person. That can sometimes make all the difference.
Isn't that the truth? And it's really, I can definitely remember those early days where we were along the same lines. He was 18 months. It was severe, if you will, at the time. And it, self-harming. And it was just so much, it was so much fear that really ran kind of our days. And I was so lucky because my husband had a sister with Down syndrome. So he had already kind of had his foot in that life of special needs and understanding how to kind of provide a safe space for someone. And so that was, wonderful. And he really guided us through a lot of time. And then on my end, I was a medical paralegal. So I fell heavily into the research part of it. And you just really want to understand, what, why, where, all of the things. And, in that, I also kind of started to recognize we are alone in this. Just like you kind of said, and we couldn't lean on our parents at that time. And we really felt like an island. And kind of in that also, I agree, is where I recognize that, like, I have to make friends. Like, there's got to be a way. Like, and just like you went to the school, was at the preschool and just started talking to all the parents and kind of putting myself out there to these other parents. And the principal recognized and asked me if I would be the special needs parent liaison between them and the parents to be able to communicate back and forth. And oh man, I was so excited, this opportunity to be able to do this. But we only made it until first grade. And then because, and he's so much different. He's twice exceptional and also semi-verbal. So he was reading at 1 and writing at 2, but still non-speaking until about 4.5. And today it's not reciprocative conversation. It's very much still echolalia and other language pieces. We call it puzzle talk and the puzzle buster. And so in that, it's just that, like I started seeing, okay, well, where's the need? Where's the lack? Where do we fill all of these gaps? And whoa, it's overwhelming. And I can't believe I look back and that's a decade ago, as probably yourself, and they're teenagers, and he's grown so much. He's, thrived in so many ways, but he still will probably live here for all, with us for the rest of his life. And it's a hard part to prepare for. And you have to prepare. And that's another tricky part, because you're getting to that guardianship kind of age as well, where you're probably doing a lot of learning on that end. What do you think as far as that really important part for especially maybe churches, because you're working in that ministry field? What is one main component that you want them to have for the autistic community?
Absolutely. And you know what? You actually just spoke to it, because whenever I go to a church, and this is where, if I do any kind of an awareness talk or a training, or even in my regular presentations, if it's, let's say, like a conference, I always start with a picture of my family. And of course, now it's my new family. It's my new wife and stepmom. But, I often describe my son. I say, and now granted, he's living in another state, at least for right now. But, in general, when he lived here and as he grew up, I say, let me tell you about him. He was so busy with all of this stuff, and yeah, he did therapy, but he did the fun therapy. He did the special needs karate. He did the equine therapy. He did the swim therapy. He was involved in all these things. And then, once in a while, it might be something weird or different you try, like ice skating or something, and who knows, right? And I say, but let me tell you one other important thing about him. He doesn't have any friends. Now, that people who are not from this world might scratch their heads like, yeah, but wait, you just said he was involved in all this stuff. And I say, yes, but it's kind of this default where you kind of have your school friends, right? The ones who are just in your program. And quite honestly, for him, he kind of started with the same kids and traveled with them since kindergarten for the most part. But, he doesn't have anybody calling him up on the weekend saying, hey, let's hang out, or what are you doing? Or you want to go shoot hoops or play video games? He doesn't have that. He doesn't have the language. He doesn't have the social skills. Why is that an issue? Because he's 17 now. One day he'll be 30, 40, 50. Oh, by the way, he's an only child. Oh, by the way, so are both of his parents. So he doesn't, and now granted, well, I'm remarried, and if mom remarries, okay, you might have some extended family in there or whatever, but, he's also, it's also not his original birth family, so to speak, it's extended family and stepbrothers and, all this kind of stuff. So, the reality is that at some point in his life, however old he gets, and that's the thing that I also mentioned to churches or anybody, the disability population is growing in number, and it's also growing older. Now, it's growing older because we have advances in medical science, and that's all great. But the reality is that my son might live to be 70, 80 easy, maybe more. At some point, mom and dad aren't going to be around anymore, and neither will most of the people that he knows right now in his life. Who's going to be his community? We're going to be the people to check in on it. We're going to be the people to say happy birthday, Merry Christmas, I love you. Who will those people be? This is where the church has, as I also like to say, an opportunity and an obligation, right? Because in the same way that a good church community might connect with somebody in hospice, or someone in elder care or memory care, like my own mother, quite honestly, in that same way, you also want to be connecting with those individuals who might have a group home situation of some form, and maybe they're not, in like medically incapacitated, or not near the end of their life necessarily, but they might just be older and not have anybody left. So there you have an opportunity to take, and again, this is also something when I work with churches, because a lot of churches today have some form of a disability ministry. They have some form of a program, some form of an environment. But the problem is that they really see it as either like an extension of a kids ministry or kind of a Band-Aid thing. We have some families who have something, and so we're just going to try to make it best for them. The reality is that you want that to grow to the point where those folks are welcomed and accepted like anybody else, right? Because, oh, by the way, they've got interests and they've got skills and talents, and the churches that do this really well, folks who identify with a disability are also contributing, right? They're also serving, they're also volunteering, right? It might look different for different folks, but they still, if they have the ability to do something, then that's what they acknowledge and that's what they lean into. And also in that same way, we need to go beyond the church walls and say, okay, how are we supporting that community again when they may not have anybody left? And that, quite honestly, as a parent, is what grieves me the most. I mean, there's lots of things to grieve, and there certainly have been, but that is the thing that absolutely scares the living, whatever you want to say, out of me. And it's the thing that maybe keeps me up at night the most. And so that's why I really have a passion with this, and especially when I talk to these church communities and things, this is what I really, want to impress upon them is this for a lot of families, this is a very, very serious issue. And you can help us. We're not saying you need to fix it. We're not saying you need to do all the work, but you can be an integral piece of the puzzle that, gives a family, kind of this identity of peace and safety, as they move forward in life.
Absolutely. How would somebody start, any of my listeners now, if they wanted to start, this conversation with their church, or, should they reach out to you to get advice? How do they reach out to their own church leaders on their own? Or do they reach out to other parents to kind of come with them as like a little, tribe? Or what kind of advice do you give them?
It's different for every church. And this is the other thing too that I mention to people, because sometimes people see, my organization and my work as like a salesperson. Like, I have a kit or a program I'm going to sell you. I don't sell you anything. Matter of fact, we work with everybody for free. We're a straight ministry, right? So, I mean, what I tell churches is, listen, don't get hung up on money. It's a matter of what works best for you, because every church is different in terms of their size, their resources, their physical space. So it's going to look differently for everybody. But where I like to start out is actually with the leadership, right? So if there are, church leaders listening to this, or if you're a parent of disability and nothing's going on in your church, you really want to start with the leadership if at all possible. And the reason why is because, again, going back to this idea that we're not going, at the end of the day, we're really not going for inclusion. Inclusion's fine, but what we're really going for is acceptance, right? Because the problem is that many churches make a classroom or make an environment or something, and then they stop, and it stops growing. And a lot of people don't even know it's even there, because it's just that weird classroom that's down the hall and down the steps, and we don't know what goes on there, right? So the idea here is start with the leadership so they can embrace it. and make it part of the DNA of the church, make it an integral part of the community. And that has to come from the leadership on down. So, for example, what I do, my organization has offices all over the country, and we can support people with, in-person training. We have tons of online resources. We can work with you virtually. So there are a number of ways you could do it. And all you would have to do is go to johnnyandfriends.org, punch in your zip code, and you'll find a local office. And if you're in the Midwest, it's probably me. Maybe not, but probably. But we can work with you in a variety of ways. The other thing that I will also mention is, because again, sometimes I talk to churches and they might have a particular need. So they might say, for example,
right.
It's actually Joni. Sorry. It sounds,
I should have asked you ahead of time.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Perfect.
It confuses people because when they see Joni, they think Joni, and it's actually Johnny, believe it or not. But that's a great place to start. But also too, I'm, as I mentioned, in terms of my other work with other organizations around the country, there are a ton of ministries and organizations that do what we do, not necessarily in terms of our size or scope, but a lot of them equally have great resources. Some resources we actually don't have, right? So what I like to emphasize too is, listen, if I don't have it, I can get it for you, or I can point you in the right direction, right? So if it's something specific you're looking for, or this is what we're thinking in our head, great, let's see how we can make that happen. But the other thing I want to emphasize too, and going back to that point about money and resources, because that's usually the first thing people go to just as a natural response. How much is this going to cost? Well, here's the thing. I don't cost anything, but what do you want to spend on the ministry? Do you need to spend $10,000? You can, but you don't have to. Do you need to spend $1,000? You can, but you don't have to. You could literally start with nothing. And again, I emphasize this to churches. There are folks I know that have incredible programs. They don't have a classroom. They don't have a sensory room. They don't have, a lot of things other bigger churches do, but they have a great program. They've got great volunteer buddies. They have a great structure in place. So there are a whole variety of ways to do it, but don't let any hang up get to you and say, well, we just can't do that. Or the other thing that really gets to me is when a church will say, we don't do that, but go talk to the folks down the street. It's kind of like, for those of you who remember the old Christmas movie Miracle on 34th Street, Macy's doesn't have it, go to Gimbel's. Well, here's the problem. That family might really want to go to that church. Maybe that family grew up in that church. Maybe that family really likes that church for some reason. They have other friends or family there. It's closer. Or in general, the church should just be a welcoming, inviting place, period. And disability should not stand in the way of that. Okay. So, it's great if you're helping them or you believe you're helping them, but why don't you make your doors open and be honest? And that's the other thing I say too. Look, I'm a parent. I get it. Look, just be honest. Here's what we have. We have this, we don't have that. Or maybe we have nothing, but you're welcome. You're welcome to be here. And if we can make it work, great. And, if you want to bring in some resources to help us, awesome. But just be honest, right? As opposed to saying it's just not something we do. Well, here's the thing, going back again to my other point about the disability population growing in number and getting older, churches can't ignore this part of their community. And again, that's another thing I hear. We don't have those folks here. Yeah, you do. You might not realize it, or maybe there are folks in the community that won't come or won't attend because they don't feel welcomed, or they don't feel that it's as accessible as it could be.
Absolutely. I really hope a lot of listeners in my city are, listening and understanding, because I live in Utah. I'll let you just go with that. And so, I hope that with that population that there's some big movements of acceptance and inclusion and belonging, letting everyone belong where they desire to, if like you said, with the resources you have available in your churches and in your support groups, for sure. What about for the dads out there? Is there an online group that you have that we can send them to get a hold of you, things like that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, they can always reach out to me. You can find me on social media or through my website or whatever. It's easy to find me. But an organization that I actually want to recommend, that I always recommend when I do these kind of interviews, is Special Fathers Network. So Special Fathers Network, you can find it online if you just Google Special Fathers Network, and it's a national organization. It's based here out of Chicago, but it has incredible reach and they have incredible resources. So what do they have? First of all, we talked about support groups. They have virtual support groups called mastermind groups. The model comes out of like the corporate world, but don't let that scare you or anything. But it's they're wonderful just meetup groups with guys from around the country. Sometimes it's a mix of guys from around the country. Sometimes it's specific to a given area, just kind of based on what works for you. Some groups meet different days or nights and that type of thing. But I have made some wonderful relationships and friendships. I'm not currently doing those meetup groups right now, but I have in the past, and they are incredible. And it's an incredible organization. There are a ton of great resources on there. So talking about podcasts, for example, I would tell you that disability-wise, that podcast, not to insult yours, of course,
No,
but I
no,
would tell you
never.
when you look at that, when you look at that podcast list, it is very, very impressive. Pretty much anyone that has done anything disability-wise is on there to some level. And what's also cool about it too is as part of the virtual groups, the meetup groups. Okay, so I'll just tell you this story quick. So part of that is that we do like a book club, like a book study, and it's usually a book on disability, or once in a while it might just be like a guy's book or a dad's book. But David, who runs the organization, he always gets the author of the book that we're reading to come on and do a little Q&A. And that's regardless of the book we're reading, mind you. So one time, this was a couple of years ago, we read, I'm sure you're familiar with Temple Grandin, and we read her book, Thinking in Pictures, and Temple came on. And Temple came on, did a Q&A with us. And what's actually funny is that for that Q&A, she was on, but another guy who was actually connected to our organization, and we got movie or TV buffs here, but there's a guy named Joe Mantegna. And Joe Mantegna is a Hollywood actor originally from Chicago, but he's also a father of disability. So because he's part of the organization, technically, he was on the call too. So you had a Hollywood guy, you had Temple Grandin, you had these guys from all over the country. It's like, hey, this is a party, right? So it's that kind of connection, those kind of resources. And there's great YouTube videos. There's a virtual conference every spring in like May that's also done. So and there's also a mentoring group, meaning let's say you don't want to jump into a big group, at least not right away. You can get connected with one mentor guy. He might be in your area, or maybe somebody virtually, maybe same age or disability as your child, but you can get connected with a mentor father that can then kind of be like your life coach in this area, so to speak. So there's a ton of great resources with it. I absolutely love it. So I would really encourage you to check them out. There are a couple of other smaller, organizations and ministries that also, do stuff. There's one called Fatherhood Commission. So it's like commission with a CO and capital M, Fatherhood Commission. They're a national organization as well. They're a Christian organization. So not all of them are faith-based, for those who that makes a difference. But they are also a great organization that also does virtual meetups. And then there is another Christian one called Rising Above Ministries, and they're out of Kentucky. And they actually do really good parent support groups for moms and dads. So I would strongly suggest, like, any of those are ones that I absolutely have vetted and would speak to, for sure. But definitely explore that. And again, if you're a guy out there and this is all really fresh and new for you and you have nobody, definitely consider, maybe connecting with Special Fathers Network, on some level, if it's a group thing or an individual thing. But again, I'm always happy to connect with anybody. I'm really serious about that. Anybody can find me online, connect with me through social media, or like I said, website, that type of thing. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with you and see if maybe there's, someone or something that I can connect you with.
I love that. I'm the same spirit. I want to just connect people with all the right things and resources and families, and give me your website so I can share that with everyone.
Yeah, it's just my name. It's just johnfela.com. So JOHNFELA.com. And you'll see samples of my writing, speaking, podcasts, etc. on there, so you kind of get a flavor for who I am and what I'm involved with. Again, if you're interested in some of the resources I mentioned, either for supporting your church in terms of disability ministry, or if you're looking for someone, even as a speaker, or someone to, consult from a parenting perspective, fatherhood perspective, please reach out. I like I said, I do a little bit of everything. So, whatever your question or need is, feel free to shoot it to me.
Wonderful, great resources. And I really love the work you're doing. It is very necessary, and supports for dads, just there couldn't be enough. And I don't think enough dads look for them. So hopefully we can get this to as many dads out there as is necessary to do some. I'll send some to my, some of the great dads I know that are out there making wonderful, programs and other podcasts and things. And we'll just get the word out as much as possible. It was such a nice conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and the vulnerable parts and all, and really appreciate that.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we'll definitely be in touch.
Awesome.
Shining bright, oh yeah, stories of love and courage all throughout the night. Her voice resonating, an anthem for all through the trials and the triumphs. She answers the call, a mother and a fighter, breaking barriers in stride. With love as her guide, she'll never hide. She's changing the world for you, with a heart that's fierce and strong. Empathy's a melody. Journey we all belong. Followers gather like stars in the night, so bright. 44,000 voices sharing in the light. She stands for family, advocates for more. A movement of compassion, ways will soar. Podcast together, a symphony of support. Creating life, changing rapport. She's changing the world for you. A heart that's fierce and strong, empathy's a melody.